Hello everybody. I had a friend who asked me, how do you throw a pot from the beginning? And I'm sure everybody else wants to know that too if you haven't done it before. So I'm going to show you. First of all, you need clay. And the secret to start with clay is you need to wedge it. Okay? And basically what that is kneading the clay like dough for baking bread. And so all the air bubbles are out, and then it's a good consistency, and it's the same all the way through it, not hard and soft, just perfect. So I've done that already. I mean, you can look that up if you want to be able to know how to do that. I'm throwing on a Randall kick wheel, and it has a plaster bat. Now, if you were throwing on a plastic bat on another wheel, you wouldn't want the bat wet, as your piece of clay will just slide around. However, plaster is very absorbent, and so you want that wet, so that when you put the clay down, it'll actually kind of pull it and stick it to the bat top. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to add a little water with a sponge. And plaster absorbs it. So, at first the water's sitting there, and then it just goes right into the clay. I'm sorry, right into the plaster. And so once you get it saturated, not completely, but enough water to where it's going to help the clay stick. And so some people think that throwing on the wheel is called throwing because of the initial throw, where you just smack it down. So let's go with that. You want it in the center, just like trimming, centering. And basically, once you get it as close to the center as possible, then you perfect it by guiding it to the center. Get your heads wet. Get it to slide, not too much. A lot of people make the mistake of using too much water, and what that does is it weakens the clay, creates a mess. It's so slippy. You don't need that. You just need a slide. And what you do is you keep the elbows in your body, whole body. What you want to do is you want to throw with everything rather than just an arm or just hands. You'll get more support. You'll be stronger. And you'll have a lot more control over the clay. So some people use a snow plow method, where the plow, where on both sides you're pushing to the center. That away there. Some people just use the palm. So when the wheel goes this way, I'm doing counterclockwise, which is pretty much the American way or European way. If you go to Japan, they throw it clockwise. So since it's counterclockwise, I'm having the clay go into my left hand, going into my hand, pushing it to the center, leaving that way. Then my right hand pushes down, compresses the clay to create, I don't know, like a little, I don't know what you call it, just a little mound that's right in the center. Once you get the mound down, centered, where there's no wobble to it, then you take your fingers, some people like their thumbs, and you push right in the center. And you push, push, push to where you have about that much clay on the bottom, okay? If you're not quite sure because of just guessing, because you're not used to it, eventually you'll be able to predict or estimate. You can use a needle tool, which you can't see this. This is a homemade needle tool. I got a little cork, I put it in. This is a bead from one of those taxi cab seats where there's like 1,000 beads. Took those apart, put some glue in there with a T-pin, and basically push down to the bottom. Then put your finger to where the clay basically stops your finger, and then pull out, and then you can see that's how much clay we have left, okay? And that's pretty good. We can always trim off later. If you get it too thin, then you're gonna get cracks. It's basically gonna fall in on you when you go to trim it. So since we're good, you close that hole back up with some pressure, and then basically you can pull straight back, which some potters like that, and some potters throw to the side. If you think of this as like a clock with 12, 6, 3 and 9, you want to be throwing right around 5 o'clock, pulling to the 5 o'clock. Okay, you want the clay leaving as you're pulling, so you're throwing on the right side. If you're throwing over here, because the clay is going this way, it might jam up, grab, tear the pot apart. So now that I've pulled out, flatten the bottom so it's nice and even, and go back and forth with some pressure on the bottom. What that does is it strengthens the clay and you'll have less chance of a crack. You don't have to worry about the walls because they're spinning and you're compressing it and it strengthens it. But the bottom, if you just open it, the clay particles are all jumbled up. And what you want to do is you want to compress them so that they're together and strong. Sometimes what people do is they take a credit card or some kind of rib, basically a rib. It's called a rib because it used to be animal bones, animal rib, but now they're made out of wood and things like that. Take the flat edge, put pressure down on the bottom, and that can create it so it's a nice, even, consistent, flat bottom. And the pressure will help strengthen it too. Okay. Now, we've got it opened up. Kind of looks like a little donut. It's hard for you to see, but trust me. Slide, not too much water, just enough to slide. Pressure from the inside, pressure from the outside, equally. And then be sensitive to how thick it is. You don't want to go too thin at first because you'll just tear it right off. You want to put pressure on and then compress to where there's still some thickness to it, but then as you pull up, it rises. You're basically squeezing that clay, channeling it up. Collaring is another thing you can do too. So basically from the outside, you can kind of compress the clay. And what that does is it kind of brings it in. And then anytime you push the clay in, it thickens it. And then you can actually go taller with it. Anytime you go out with clay, it actually thins it. So you got to be careful not to get too thin. So I am pulling either straight up or straight up to the center. And it rises. Okay. Usually you do a few pulls. You don't want to do it all. I mean, professional potters can do it all at once, right? Or a few times. But here, just take it easy. A little bit at a time. Sensitive. Anytime the clay starts to catch on you, back off pressure, okay? And then just let it rotate a little bit, rise. Rotate a little bit, rise. Pressure equal. Make sure the walls are equal thickness. And again, like I said, I can collar by pushing on the outside, but you want to make sure it slides. Too much friction, it'll just twist it and tear it apart. But not too much water, you will weaken the clay. And then when you go to try to add some shape and form to it, it'll just collapse on you. One more pull and then I'm going to show you how to texturize it. A lot of times the clay on the bottom is too thick on beginners, so make sure you push that in, compress that clay in the bottom, and you'll get a little bit more height on the piece. And you'll also save trimming later on. Press, raise, press, raise, press, raise. This is called pulling. Now you might see I got a little wobble in there. That's okay. Just when it starts to pull like that, back off the pressure. With that wobble, I can go in with a rib and straighten it out. It's important to make sure there's not a whole lot of water in the bottom, because that water can break down your molecules and again increase your chance for cracking. So a little bit of sponge, soak up that water on the bottom. And then let me show you what I was talking about in terms of straightening it out. I like to collect credit cards and things like that. I've got one from my mom back when she was alive, and there was actually a Blockbuster. Can you imagine that? And you go get videos, buy two, get one free. So she had a Blockbuster card, and when I use it, I think of her. This one is from one of my all-time favorite students. Her name is Katie Perkis. This was from her 2001-2002 school year. So she let me keep this, and then I use it to throw, and I think about her, send good thoughts her way. All the tools I use, I tend to like to have a mental connection with them, people. So sometimes I inherit tools from other potters, or certain tools remind me of them, and so as I'm throwing, I try to send good thoughts their way. And you know what's kind of cool is that I found when you start thinking about people that you haven't for a while, and that's what makes it magical. You haven't thought about them for a while, but then you do. I tell you, man, if it's not that day, it may be the next. They show up. Either it's in person or through an email or a Facebook a lot, where they'll say something and you're like, the universe works. All right, so again, I'm gonna do that, and now I'm gonna show you texturing. This is just a cylinder, and I want it to be that way, and it's a little on the thicker side because I'm gonna torture it a little bit with this, and it's called a roulette. And anything that spins, that you can get to spin either with a hole in the center on something, and has texture, that's gonna impress itself into the clay as it spins. The wheel spins, this spins. So I like to collect different roulettes with different textures. And so what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna hold it in place on this little stick. It's actually a brush. And I'm gonna hold it as the wheel spins, and I'm gonna press into the clay. Not too much, I'll tear it all apart, but I want enough to where it starts to press that texture and that pattern into the clay, and I'm just gonna rise it up. And that's why I kept it as a cylinder, because it's harder to do this on a curve form, but also, once I'm done with this, I'm going to shape it, press from the outside, and what that does is that takes this texture and opens it up more. And when it opens up, not only does it look, see, it just caught and I backed off. I didn't try to force it. That's when you really mess it up. Just kind of like when you're driving in a car and you're on ice and you start to slip. Don't freak out and hit the brakes. Make it worse. Just relax. Go with it. Back off the gas, back off the brakes. Just kind of be gentle. Same thing with this. All right, now because it's spinning, you can't really see the texture. I'll probably get some lighting when we're all done, but what I'm gonna do is press now and shape it from the inside, and I usually start from the top down. So here I am pressing, and I'm feeling from the inside and be real sensitive to how thick it is and how thin. If it's thicker, I can press more. If it's thinner, I gotta back off. So the first push is usually just to kind of feel it out, sense it out, see where the thick is, the thin is, and then it becomes shaping and being very sensitive to the support structure of it. If you go too far out on the base, it's just gonna collapse on you. So you have to be sensitive to the curve and for support. Too far like that, collapse. Curve, support. And usually, just like with throwing, I do this a few times. Don't rush it. Be gentle. Okay, now you can see the bottom there, how it's coming out. I don't want to go any further than that. In fact, I could also go back in and kind of shape that a little bit so it keeps the curve to support the rest of the pot. And this is important now, and the reason why you didn't use a lot of water before is because the clay is still stiff. You haven't soaked it to where it becomes more gooey and less able to hold a form. So with this one, I'm going to try to get a nice curved body, and then I'm going to bring in the top with some collaring. Slick. Push. Round, round, round. One more time. I want it a little more curved. Still a little thick here. I'm pushing out. Not too much, otherwise I'll twist the pot and it'll come right off. All right, so now we're gonna collar again, up top. And this is where you gotta be careful again. If you don't have the slide and gentleness, it could twist and ruin your pot. So take it easy. Slick it up first. Not too much, because that water can go down on here, soften it, and collapse it. Just right where you're gonna collar it. And then what you do is you slowly squeeze in and pull up at the same time. Slowly squeeze in and pull up at the same time. If you just squeeze in, it's gonna wrinkle and collapse on you. If you just pull up, it's not gonna get that compression or narrowing that you want. So, collar, up, collar, up. Before in my trimming video, I talked about form and how you want a beautiful base, a beautiful body. This is called a shoulder. You want a nice shoulder. This is called a neck, and then you want a rim. So there's 5 elements to being able to make a good pot. So right now I'm working on the neck. Boy, we work on the base a little bit after. But right now we need more clay down there to support the piece. And now I'm working on, I got the shoulder already and the body, and now the neck, tightening it in and rising up. Tightening it in and rising it up. It's all little increments. And then the rim, kind of flatten it out. Now here's the thing, sometimes what happens is it gets a little wonky up top, where one side's a little higher than the other, and that could be just from clay being inconsistent, it could be from being a little off center, it could be that you pulled a little tighter on one side than the other. So I got a little bit of that up top right now. I don't know if you can see it. I think you can see it. So what I'm gonna do is, remember that needle tool? What you do is you use it to trim off the unevenness. So what you do is you find a spot where you want it to be, hold the needle, don't just jam it in there. Let it slowly, let the wheel turn and do the work. And just slowly introduce it into the clay until it slices through on its own, keeping it level until it goes all the way through, and then you get a ring, a little ribbon. Sometimes I like to keep the extra clay, because sometimes when I do my more sculptural pieces where I put little dudes on there, I use that to add to the piece. So now you can see the top level. I am just going to smooth out the top, get rid of any rough edges. Okay. And now this rim is the final act of beauty. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to push from the inside. Maybe I should use 2 fingers so I'm not flicking you off. Push from the inside, and then on the, I'm sorry, from the outside, and from the inside a little bit above, push out. Pushing in, pushing out. And what that does is I can flare the top. And you can see that it's coming out, and that's going to give a nice S curve. They say a nice piece of pottery has got a S to it. An S curve. I'm also pushing down on the shoulder a little bit to give it a little bit more of a cut, or a little definition. And then again, I'm still working the top, flaring it out. There we go. Now we're having fun. There you go. See? Now I'm gonna let you know a little secret that I like to do. It's kind of personalize the pots. And it's called fluting the top. Kind of like if you're making a pie crust. You just flute all the way around it. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna stop the wheel. And I'm gonna take 2 fingers and a third on the inside, outside, push and move it. Push and move it. Push and move it. Push. All the way around, nice and even and consistent. Unless you want to get funky, some of the asymmetrical pots can make them look like waves splashing and things like that. Alrighty, now I'm just going to clean my hands real quick so I can show you from the top. And I'm going to trim away a little excess from the bottom. And then tomorrow, once it's getting to the leather hard, I'll flip it over like I did with other pots and trim away all the excess. Give it a foot, which is what lifts it up off the table a little bit and gives it a nice finished bottom. So this tool here, it's called a wooden knife. And basically I'm going to slice into the bottom and I'm going to dig away some of that excess clay that we were using to support the piece. So here we go. Very careful, support yourself. Be mindful of going into the clay. Don't be too aggressive. You just grab it and ruin the whole pot and then you're going to be upset. Also look on the inside and see the angle of how it goes in. Match that angle on the outside. And remember, you still want to leave the clay thick enough. So very, very gently, I'm going to push in, cut, cut. Mindful of that inner curve. Don't cut too much until you get down to the base of the bat. The bat is what you call the top of the wheel that you can pull off. That's what's nice about this one is you can just pull it off, go do something, come back. Another nice thing about plaster is it absorbs that moisture, so when you come back the next day, you can just pop it right off. If you're using a plastic bat, you're gonna have to cut it. And basically with that, you're gonna use a wire and you tighten it, push down, slice through, and then you can lift it. But we don't need to do that because this plaster bat is sweet. You just pick it up, do stuff with it. Okay, so I cut through, but the clay's still there. So now I gotta dig that out without smushing it into the pot. So very careful, slow, dig and turn, dig it away, separating it from the piece, making sure you don't mush it into the piece, ruining the form. Nice, it's gonna have a nice bottom there, nice cut. I'm gonna do it one more time to smooth it out, and then all the finishing I'll do tomorrow. Having a little problem, I got a little chunk there I gotta get rid of. There we go, that's better. I'll smooth that out a little bit. Dig it away. Sometimes you gotta do it by hand so that you don't accidentally ruin the whole pot. Alrighty, now clean my hands and show you what it looks like, because I think the light right now is pretty strong and all you're getting is pretty much the white of the clay. I'm gonna get a little bit more contrast for you. Actually, I wonder if I touch on this, if it'll focus a little better for you. Ha! It did. Check it out. So now you can see the texture on here. Cut on the side, you can see a little bit more of the dimension, the shadows. But I am also going to show you up close. You can see that texture with the fluting, and then also I like to put something on the inside, whether it be a small spiral. Sometimes I really get into it and put like a bouncing pattern that looks like flowers. Oops, there we go. Sorry about that. Actually, what I'll do, remember I talked about trimming? So tomorrow what I'll do is here's one that I just did, I will trim all that excess off the bottom, okay? And then I will create a foot. And so what that does is it lightens up the pot, but it also creates a nice definition to the bottom of the pot. And when it sits on a tabletop, it minimizes what's actually touching on the tabletop, so that when it moves, if it's like wood table, less chance of getting a scratch on there. Also what I did is, as I finished it, I put pressure on the outside and smoothed it, so it's less chance of being rough and, like I said, scratching a tabletop. So, there you go, peeps. Go get them. If you don't have a wheel, get one. Take care.